Welcome to another episode of Living Justice, Living Leadership. I'm your host, Lee Fisher, Dean of Cleveland Marshall College of Law at Cleveland State University. You know, I've had the great privilege to live my life at the intersection of the public, private, nonprofit, and academic worlds. As a lawyer, CEO of 2 nonprofit organizations, and as a state legislator, attorney general, and lieutenant governor. And the lessons I've learned come down to just 2 words: justice and leadership. That's why every week we'll talk to people who are walking the walk. Some are lawyers and some are not, but all of them have something in common. They are change makers. They are guardians of justice. They are living justice, and they are living leadership. Welcome to the second half of my interview with the 67th Governor of Ohio, Bob Taft. Last week, we talked about the personal side of Bob Taft, growing up in what many regard to be the most famous family in American political history, the Taft family. This week, we talk more about his time as governor, his view on the Trump presidency and what's happened on January 6th and the insurrection. And finally, we end our interview today with leadership lessons that he's learned from a life in public service. So here we go, the second half of my interview with the 67th Governor of Ohio, Bob Taft. Now let's move to arguably the most important office that you held. You were the 67th Governor of Ohio. For those of you listening and don't know this, the person who ran against Bob Taft in 1998 was the host of this podcast. That's right, Lee Fisher and Bob Taft squared off against each other. And given the fact that you don't hear me referred to as governor, I think you know who won that race. Bob Taft won that race by about 4 to 5 points. It was, at the time, the closest race since about the late 1970s. Since then, there have been closer races. I think it's fair to say that although it was a hotly contested race, and there were times we probably weren't the best of friends, I can tell you that not long after Bob Taft was elected governor, I was appointed president and CEO of the Center for Families and Children. And we had our annual meeting, and I went to go see Governor Taft and said, "Governor, I have a request. Even though you just defeated me in a hotly contested race, would you come and be the keynote speaker at our annual meeting?" And Bob said yes. He was very gracious then. He's always been gracious since. What do you remember about that race in which you defeated me?
Well, I remember, number one, you were a formidable opponent.
That's a good thing to say. I like that.
You were tough. It was a tough race. It could have gone either way. And as you said, I thought it was, for a tough statewide race for governor, I thought it was, extremely civil. And I think that has to do with the kind of person that you are, and that we tried to maintain, civility and respect for one another, even though we were political opponents. And I think that's reflected in the close relationship that we've had since that time. But it was tough. It was probably the toughest challenge I've had in my whole career, I would say, in going into that. The debates we had, the time it took to prepare the debates,
yes,
the amount of money that you have to raise to go a statewide race. Of course, it's nothing like what they raise today, but still, it's a real battle. And then you've got the air war on TV and radio and so forth. Maybe not too much internet back then, and then you got the ground war and the grassroots and organizing a campaign in a state like Ohio is a massive undertaking, and the travel that you have to do and the appearances that you have to make and the parades, and we probably spent half my life living in Cleveland.
Yes.
That year, because I wasn't that known in Cleveland, and you were very well known in Cleveland, so we had to try to hold the margin down up there.
One of the things I remember about that race, Bob, is that all throughout my career, one of the distinct advantages I had over my opponents was that I had a political spouse, Peggy Zone Fisher, who was a better campaigner than I was and was more popular. And I remember Peggy saying to me, "I think I've met my match in Hope Taft." And I thought it was really, they really were exceptional campaigners, and both of our best assets.
I think we were absolutely blessed, both of us, in terms of, Peggy was a fantastic campaigner, and Hope, I'm not sure she liked it, but man, she did it. She liked people, and right. that made all the difference. And I do have to say that you're extremely articulate and effective debater, so that concerned us a lot. So we made sure that in one of those debates up in Toledo, that it wasn't just you and me, but we had the Natural Law Party in there.
Oh, do I remember that?
Remember that? And then
yes.
they took up half the time in the debate.
I hated that. In fact, one of them believed in levitation, as I recall.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. The libertarian candidate. Yeah.
And kumbaya, and we're all going to be, happy together.
Yeah, I wanted to lift her right off the stage, but I couldn't. That was very clever on your part, because I remember I wanted to keep the third-party candidates off the stage so it could just be you and me, and you were able to get them in that debate. And it's not the only reason I lost, but it was one of the reasons.
Oh, but it's one of my memories.
Tell us about the highlights of your time as governor.
Well, we worked a lot on education, because that was my interest. But as you know, when you're governor, your agenda is kind of set for you as well. And we had economic challenges. We had the recession back there in 2001, 2002. A governor's at the mercy of the national economy to some extent. And when you have a recession, your revenues plummet. Some of your spending on the human services side goes up. So it's a real challenge, and you have to make cuts across the board. But it also made us focus more on the economy. And so, two of the programs that you're familiar with, we did the Third Frontier Project to try to build a higher tech, more entrepreneurial economy with more startups, and connecting the research institutions like the Cleveland Clinic, Case Western universities, to businesses in Ohio. We also had a tax reform plan that tried to shore up our manufacturing sector by getting rid of some of the unproductive, uncompetitive taxes in Ohio, and going to a broad-based, low-rate commercial activity tax that really benefited manufacturers because it didn't apply to their exports outside the state of Ohio. So that focused us there. 9/11, of course, occurred during our time as governor. And when I ran for governor, the word Homeland Security wasn't even, in my lexicon. I had no idea. And suddenly we were all talking about Homeland Security and creating a Homeland Security division and trying to protect and guard against every possible threat that might occur down the road. So that changed our agenda a lot. But we had a lot of challenges. We had some programs that I'm, happy have kind of continued. Number one, the tax plan. We still basically have that tax system in Ohio that we implemented. It was a massive rearrangement of taxes in Ohio. And then the Clean Ohio Fund that was bipartisan. Senator Glenn supported it, and providing dollars to help with river protection, trails, protecting farmland, preserving farmland, and also cleaning up our abandoned industrial sites in the cities. And that was an idea that came out of the mayors across the state, that the brownfields program. But Clean Ohio has survived up until the present day, and I think is still funding projects that really improve the quality of life and the environment, recreation across the state.
Years later, when I served as Lieutenant Governor and Director of Development with Ted Strickland, two of the programs that I was responsible for administering were the Clean Ohio program and the Third Frontier, that I had the privilege of being the chair. And I often said, and Ted Strickland said this too, that the single most effective economic development program in the last 30 to 40 years in Ohio was the Third Frontier program that was your idea, that started in your administration. And I would love if you would just explain to the listeners a little bit more about what the Third Frontier program was all about.
Well, in Ohio, we have some amazing research institutions at our universities, at Ohio State, at all the universities, Case Western Reserve, University of Dayton, where I teach as well, but they weren't connected with the economy. So part of the idea was to connect the research, commercialize that research, get it out into the economy, new products, new ideas, new companies, and also create a kind of a early stage seed capital infrastructure to get companies off the ground. So we also funded those kinds of initiatives as well. And we really tried to focus on the partnerships. It wasn't just handing out money to companies, but it was using the limited state dollars to incentivize partnerships between research institutions and the private sector, and also to encourage these research institutions to do more of what they're doing now, which is to spin off new companies, create startup companies, because we know that so many of the new jobs come from the startups, not the traditional companies in the state, and really grow a more diversified economy in the state.
Well, I still believe that you deserve the credit for the single most effective program, and I do think
thank you. I appreciate that.
It'll go down as history, I think, as a game changer when it came to, particularly to technology-based economic development.
Well, and right now I noticed Governor DeWine, they're doing these innovation zones in
Yes.
Cleveland and Columbus and Cincinnati. Really, it's the same idea.
It is the same idea. It's exactly right. Let's now move to present-day politics. Regardless of your party affiliation, most people would agree with the following statement: America has never been more politically divided. We've always had division. We've always had partisanship, but it reached new levels under President Trump. And so my question is, what are your views about what's happened over the last 4 to 5 years? And how can we bring America back to, for lack of a better word, a civil center?
That's really the most important question that we're going to be discussing. And, there were some policy measures or policies that Trump supported that I supported. I'm a conservative when it comes to appointing judges, for example, and some of the regulatory reforms I liked, some of the tax, not all the tax package, but some of the tax reforms and so forth. But the most disappointing part about the Trump presidency was it was so divisive, and it did, I think, stimulate even more polarization than we had before. And it was always amazing to me, having been governor, to perceive that Trump really didn't make a big effort to expand his base beyond his core voters, but to try to stir them up and keep them fired up and so forth. When I was governor, I got elected, barely. You got almost 50% of the vote. So but I was governor of the entire state. So Youngstown, that was very Democrat back then, and I lost big in Youngstown. But I probably spent more time up there than any other part of the state because they had needs, they had issues, they had problems needed to be addressed. And so, the result of doing something like that is to expand your base, and it showed up when I ran for re-election. As a matter of fact, 4 years later,
you won by 10 points in that race, I recall.
Right, but President Trump didn't really seem to understand the importance of that, and he was picking enemies and friends, and it divided the country, I think, in a very sad way, and it creates huge problems going forward. And of course, as we look to the future, he's still got a lot of strong support, but I was a little encouraged by some polls I saw recently in terms of the different views of Trump supporters and kind of old line party regulars in the Republican Party. And I don't know how those split out. There's probably as many Trump as party regulars, if not more, right now. But in terms of bipartisanship, working with Democrats, not thinking Democrats are bad people, the party regulars are much more balanced and more willing to work across the lines. And you've got senators and some members of the House too who are willing to do that, but not as many anymore. And that's very troubling in terms of trying to address the major problems that this country faces, whether it's dealing with China or dealing with Social Security or Medicare, or dealing with the climate, whatever it might be.
I'm the first to admit that I don't have an objective view, but the Republican Party doesn't look like the Republican Party of George Voinovich and Bob Taft or your father. It looks very different today, which is why there are a number of people in your party who are leaving the party, and they're basically saying, I'm not really leaving the party left me.
That's exactly right. And some are, yeah. I mean, some Republicans, so they're actually leaving the party.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a very different party from, when I started out in politics, and um, it became, I think, with the Tea Party movement and so forth, you
Yes.
got a much stronger, I would say, very far right of center wing in the party. And then Trump came along and basically hijacked the party, kind of,
Hmm.
some would say a hostile takeover, but he took it over and cultivated his own people. So that's reality now. The Republican Party has to deal with, and we can see how split the party is right now, even at the national level, with different views on, was the election legitimate?
Right.
Different views about Trump's conduct after the election, and uh, so this divisiveness is within the party is going to continue, I think, for a while, and it looks like former President Trump is not going to go away quietly into the night. He's going to remain a factor, and that's going to be played out in the next 2 years as we see, Republican primary contests across the country, and it may be with us, until 4 years from now when we elect a new president and there's a new Republican candidate.
Right.
My sense is that parties do to some extent reflect the personalities and the directions of the president when they have the president. And that has a big impact. And Trump certainly has had a huge impact on the Republican Party, and also a very divisive impact on the country.
What are your thoughts on the allegations that Joe Biden's election was not legitimate, and your thoughts about Trump's responsibility for what happened on January 6th?
Well, number one, there's no question that Joe Biden won the election, and Trump's own attorney general, other officials in his administration, attested to the lack of fraud. Not that there wasn't some, but and then a lot of cases went to court, as you know. Huge numbers of judges ruled in favor of the election results that occurred. It was certified, so there's no question as to who won the election. Was there some fraud? Were some of the rules changed? State by state, some of that happened, but it's hard to make an argument that that any of the changes in the rules or any fraud that might have occurred would have been enough to have swung the election
Right.
in any state, much less enough states to make a difference. So I think I would be with the Republicans who were saying, look, it's clear that that Biden won the election, and that the election was legitimate from that standpoint. Not that there weren't flaws in the process, because particularly with COVID and all the new rules that came down with regard to mail-in ballots and absentee voting, and a lot of these states didn't have the kind of controls that some of the states that have had absentee ballots for many years had. So not that there weren't issues that need to be examined. I think there are, but whether those issues would have changed the results is it's just, I don't think can be contested.
I thought the most cogent argument I heard from anyone as to why that election was legitimate was made by Mitch McConnell on the floor of the United States Senate. I thought what he said, if you had just read the quote and didn't know who said it, you would have thought it had been said by a Democrat. But the truth is that he punched a lot of holes in the theory that it was not legitimate.
Yeah, and so I certainly agree with Senator McConnell's statement. I thought it was a very strong and a clear statement as well. And then I think, sadly, former President Trump decided to perpetuate the impression that the election was stolen and it was a fraud and he won by a landslide and so forth, and carried that on, all the way to Inauguration Day, which is really, even after the states had submitted their electoral votes, even after everybody agreed who won the election, but I think he caused a lot of people, his supporters, to believe that.
Yes.
And that's a factor. And I think that he certainly bears a lot of the responsibility for what happened on January 6th, because he was fanning the flames and He was perpetuating really an untruth about the election. I think uh, misleading his supporters in that respect, and then certainly was involved in encouraging people to go to Washington on January 6th, and then encouraging his supporters to go to the Capitol. So clearly, he had a big share of responsibility for what happened.
Bob, as we near the end of this interview, I like to focus on leadership. One of the reasons I do that is that one of the reasons the name of this podcast is Living Justice, Living Leadership is that our law school, we try to not only teach the law, but try to also teach and train future leaders as well and teach leadership skills. So looking back over your career in the public sector in particular, but all the sectors, are there some leadership lessons that you impart to your students at the University of Dayton that you can share with all of us? And if there are some, can you also maybe give some examples of how you've seen that, either on your own personal experience or perhaps something you've observed from somebody else?
Well, I think it's important, first of all, to be inclusive in how you make decisions and try to accomplish policies. And that means identifying the stakeholders and reaching out to the stakeholders, whoever they may be, whether they're interest groups or whether they're state legislators, and making sure that they're involved in the decision-making process. That's the way you can actually, get things done and accomplish things. That's when we finally did pass tax reform. That's exactly what we did. We reached out to all the different interests. We cultivated legislators. Some of our school reforms, we had task forces where legislators sat, where all the different interest groups sat, whether it was teachers or school board members or members of the business community. And so by the time you do the spade work and you've involved everyone in the process, then it was almost a foregone conclusion that you could get the bill through the legislature. And of course, if you're governor, you can't do anything without the legislature. So you really have to, cultivate them and work with them and include them in the process. So that's certainly one lesson. And then, it kind of goes without saying, but spend a lot of time, if you're in a position where you have to choose people to work with you or on your team, spend a lot of time, make sure you have the best people possible, because where we got stuff done, it was because I had talented people. State government is massive, 50,000 employees, 22 departments. A governor is going to be dependent on those lieutenants there and the team that he builds in the cabinet. So where we did, like the Great Lakes Compact or Clean Ohio Fund or Third Frontier, we had really talented people working on those initiatives, and that's why it happened. But then you also have to have a vision that unites your team and that empowers your team and that includes all members of your team in trying to get things done. So I think that's really important. You and I both know the importance of building our networks and building relationships, and you never know where those will lead. And sometimes you meet these young people just starting out, and what do they know? And then 10 years later, they're in some hugely important position. So you have to help nurture people, mentor people. And that's part of what I enjoy doing at the University of Dayton, is mentoring these students and introducing them to opportunities in state government, helping them to get a leg up in state or in the federal government. But I think that seeking out mentors to help you along the way is also very, very important. And so many people are willing to give a lot of time to students and people who are just starting out, and that's invaluable.
This podcast is not just for lawyers and not just for law students. But my last question that I want to end today is, if you think back to your time at law school at the University of Cincinnati, if you could do it all over again, what are the things that you wish you had known when you were a first-year law student that would have probably made your legal education that much more valuable? And you could say to your younger self today, here's what I wish I had known when I was in law school.
Yeah, I mean, I went to law school older, so I was like, 29, 30, but even with that, I hadn't explored the field of law in the depth that I should have explored. I hadn't spoken to a lot of different attorneys doing a lot of different kinds of law. I mean, the diversity of opportunities in the legal sector is amazing and changes, from year to year. So I think it's really important for young law students starting out, of course, to get, internships but also even earlier on, to job shadow attorneys and to find out what they did, talk to them and understand what it is that they do. I mean, when you think of the diversity of the legal practice, from trial attorneys and all the litigation that goes on to advising corporations on business transactions or securities law, labor law, human resources law, patent law. The breadth of the legal profession is amazing, and so it's important that you really get out there and explore through the help of your connections, your contacts, people that you know or people that may know, to really dig into it and figure out, what are these attorneys doing? Why do they like it, or why do they not like it? And is it something that would interest you? Is it something that fits with your personality and your talents and your abilities? And then I think that can help guide you as you go through law school and into the practice of law.
I want to give you the last word today because some interviewers don't always ask the right questions. So my last question to you is there something I should have asked you that I didn't, so that you could have said something that you weren't able to say because I didn't ask the right question? Any last words from you?
Well, I don't think so, but I will tell you this, that it's kind of being governor was fun. Being ex-governor is fun too. And the best thing I find about being an ex-governor is that people still return your phone calls. Which is kind of amazing. So, and I've been able to bring a lot of elected officials, into the university, for example, which is great, and connect students to opportunities outside the university. And I try to keep up my contacts and keep in touch with people as best I can for that purpose, because what ultimately now satisfies me is helping some of these young people, pursue careers in public service as you and I did.
Well, when COVID is behind us, I'd like to invite you to come to our law school in person to speak to our students.
Thank you.
And I'd be honored if you would ask me to do so the same in Dayton someday as well.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, that would be really terrific, Lee. I'd love to do that. And thanks for the invitation. It's so exciting what you're doing up there in Cleveland with Cleveland Marshall Law School. And I'm certainly enjoying my time at UD. So sounds like a good deal.
Bob, I want to thank you for taking so much time today to be my guest on our podcast. You've been listening today to the 67th governor of the state of Ohio, Bob Taft, who's had a remarkable career not just in public service, but also in recent years in teaching in academia, training the next generation of leaders. Thank you for tuning in, and Bob Taft, thanks again for being a great guest.
My pleasure, Lee. Thanks so much.